Today we're going to be taking out our factory Datsun differential and putting in a Subaru WRX STI R180 diff. That's going to be limited slip differential, and it's going to be compatible with some other parts that we're putting on thanks to some 27 spline adapters from our friends at Techno Toy Tuning.
Okay, so first things first, we got to get out our old stub shafts and rear axles before we can replace it with the Wolfcreek Racing Futofab CV kit. And there's going to be 4 bolts, and obviously this is your axle, so it's going to rotate. So what I've done is I've used a bolt just to brace it against this nut right here, so that when I turn the axle to loosen these bolts, it's going to give me that stability. Down here is the bolt that we're going to take out first, and this side is kind of hard to access with the wrench. So what I've been doing is I've just been loosening from this side with the wrench and this side using pliers, and I've had pretty good success with that. But I'll start just by breaking this bolt loose, and then I'll just grab it with the pliers. One down, 3 to go, and you do want to save these bolts for the reinstallation of the new axles, and also mark the position of this for when you're putting in your new one. But yeah, it's just that. Do it 3 more times, and this is just going to pop right off. And that's the last bolt. We get our bracing bolt out of here, and this guy is just going to drop right out. And there you go. We have removed factory stub shaft.
By stub shaft, I mean half shaft.
Now time to get this differential out. It's gonna be these 2 bolts, a few bolts up there, and we'll slide that guy out and put in our new axles and differential. Okay, so now we're gonna start removing the diff now that we've removed the rear axles. And it's going to be this bolt right here, and then there's also a bolt up in front there, both 17 mil. So let's start by getting this mustache bar out.
This mustache bar is about 50 years old, so as you can imagine, a lot of the bushings that are in there are totally cracked and hard and don't really do their job that well anymore.
So now, as you can see, I have the diff up on a jack because there's only one more bolt that's holding it in, and it's probably about, I don't know how many pounds, but enough to hurt you. So there's a top bolt here, and then the nut comes out on the bottom. So I've just used this to brace it so that you can get traction. And this guy's in there a fair amount, so I'm going to use a breaker bar to get it loose.
Although we're taking out the diff and the factory U-joints, we do need to maintain some of the studs and bolts just so we can put them in on our new axle kit. Okay, so in order to remove what we need to get out of here, which are these studs that I was talking about, they have to come out through here, and obviously we don't have the clearance for that. Initially, I thought that we would have to come in here and take out this little pin which is holding in your axles so that we could slide them out, and that would give us the clearance to remove the studs that we need. But actually, I'm pretty sure that if we just remove these, 4 nuts that attach the studs to the stub shafts, then we can just slide this out, and then it won't be connected to this anymore, and we can have the clearance that we need. And that's just going to be done with some 14mm wrenches, and these guys are definitely pretty rusted on, so it might take a little bit of elbow grease to get them off, just a fair warning. Okay, so as you can see, we got all these 4 bolts removed. Took a little bit of persuasion with a chisel to break some of this rust off. But now, as you can see, that comes off. And we can remove this guy with maybe a 12mm. But the point is that you can take this stub shaft off which is going to give us the clearance to get these puppies off, which is pretty cool because I've been struggling with that today. Okay, so as you can see, this guy came out quite nicely, and set that aside, and now this puppy is out, and we are going to be able to get these studs out finally. We got the stub shafts in the vise, and you know, Nissan doesn't make these parts anymore, so I thought about using a hammer, just kind of like what we did with the wheel studs, to get these guys out. But if you fuck up these threads, you know, you can't replace them. So what I've done is I've just put them in my vise. Pretty simple, pretty easy to do, and so you can see, you just use the vise super hard, and you're gonna get them to push out with a little bit of force, a little out of breath, but just that's the general idea, just because you really don't want to mess up these threads because you cannot replace them. Okay, so when we're putting our adapter onto our stub shaft, what I did is I ended up having to actually get these pressed in by a machine shop. I tried to pull them in, and it started to strip the threads a little bit. And the guy that I picked them up from at the machine shop, he said these are about 1/1000th of an inch smaller than the factory stub axles, so it takes a heck of a lot of force to get these in. So I ended up just going to a machine shop. If you have a hydraulic press at home, you can do that. And now we're going to attach this into the conversion plate, and you want everything to be pretty flush, so I'm just going to use a vise to get everything nice and snug. These adapter plates are part of the Wolfcreek Racing axle kit that Futofab now makes, and they go with the Techno Toy Tuning 27 spline adapters. Okay, so now these guys are all snugged on. I'm going to torque these bolts to 50 foot-pounds is what the axle kit says, and you're not going to have any access to these once you actually install the kit, so it's a good idea just to make sure that you get all your ducks in a row before you actually put them in, because as we all know, the chain is only as strong as the weakest link. Shout out to Craig. And these are pretty small nuts, so there's not much clearance. So you're going to want to use a thin walled socket. And I just have it set to 50 foot-pounds. And there's 50. And it's just the same for the other two, and then we'll get them in the differential. Okay, so here's the R180 Diff from a Subaru WRX STI. It's got the 27 splines, hence we need the adapter. And now this guy's just going to go in there. Should thread right in. And it's going to stop right around there. What you're going to want to do is give it a nice dead blow with the hammer, or you can maybe just get it with your hand. And yeah, as you can see, that's now in there. And what it does is it engages there are internal C-clips in this diff, whereas in some other diffs, what you end up having is a couple of C-clips on the stub axles, which mean you have to take this whole thing off and then take out some spider gears to get the C-clips off. But what's nice about this is there's just internal C-clips. You just give it a nice hit and it slides right in. And so that's what the diff is going to look like. And now we just have to mount up our half shafts, our CV joints, and we'll be good to go. Okay, so this is part of the Wolfcreek axle kit that mounts up to the wheel side, and so you don't have studs here, you just have standard bolts and nuts. But what's interesting about this is, see if you can see the holes here. On the diff side, there were circular holes so that you could kind of fit a socket into here and tighten down the nuts. But what this does is when you put in one of these guys, is it holds the bolt captive, so you can't turn it at all, because these two walls encapsulate the bolt itself, and then on the other side you can attach the nut. So you're not really going to get much play in there, so that's a nice feature of the kit. And now we're just going to attach this to where the old half shaft's bolted up to on the wheel side of the car, and then we'll be able to put in our CV joints and the diff. Okay, so here we are on the wheel side of the car. We have our adapter plate, and I'm going to try to show you guys how this bolts up to the half shaft. There's the place where it used to be, and it's kind of hard to do this with one hand, but I should be able to see this. Just kind of goes in there, and then on the other side you got your threads poking out, which you're going to thread your nuts onto, and it's about as simple as that. I don't know if I'll be able to film this one-handed, but maybe I'll show you guys the finished product. Okay, so now all 4 of these nuts are on. It says to torque them down to 50 foot-pounds, but I don't know how you're going to fit a torque wrench in here. So I just tightened them with the 17mm wrench to the German standards, gut and tight. And yeah, now we're good to install the diff and the axle kit. So in order to get this differential to fit correctly in the Datsun, the input flange for the drive shaft needs to be removed because this is 4 inches in diameter, and the input flange on the factory setup for the Datsun only accommodates about 3.5. But I'm pretty sure I'll be able to put this on. Once I put the whole differential through, I'll be able to come in from the other side and reinstall the input flange. Otherwise, I'm going to have to use the factory R180 input flange from the differential that I removed. So we'll see how that goes. But it is important to mark where your nut goes. You can see I marked with Sharpie here and here, just so everything lines up the way that it's supposed to be torqued down. And with this, obviously I have free moving parts. So what I did is I just used the impact driver to get this nut off. But yeah, you do want to mark where these things line up so you can get them back to the correct torque specs. Okay, the input flange is now off. Took a little bit of tapping with a steel mallet just to break it free. And now let's see if it'll fit in the car. Okay, so I'm pretty sure this is gonna fit. Just got the diff on a jack. I already attached it to the mustache bar. And as you can see, this is the hole that we're working with. Just trying to get this in there. Jack it up a little bit more. And let's see if this will go in. Oh yeah, there it is. Just gotta go in a little bit more. So now you can see that these guys right here line up with the bolt holes. We'll see if we can get this bolted in and then see if the new input flange mounting location will work. It's also come to my attention that these are definitely on the wrong side, because if you see where the bolt drops down, you want that bolt right here to go through these bushings. So I'm just gonna flip this to the other side of here and it should line up a lot better. These bushings have been turned around and everything's lined up. Just got one more bolt to put in and the differential will be good to go. And there we go. And then I'll jack it up so that these guys get in. What I'm gonna do is, before I attach this though, I'm gonna put on the washers that come with onto top and bottom of these bushings before I thread it through this bolt. Okay, so at first when I was putting in this mustache bar, I tried to have it pre-assembled. So
I already had the polyurethane bushings on like that, but the angle that you need to raise the diff to doesn't really give you much wiggle room. So like when this is lower, because it's on a jack, it angles it kind of like this. If you have a hole that's supposed to match up with that perpendicular bolt, it's not going to slide on. So what I ended up doing is, just because it's really hard to get these things to go all the way to the top when they're on the mustache bars, I put these bushings on first. And I'm going to do that on both sides, and then I'm going to bring the mustache bar up and attach those to the bushings. And I think that's the easiest way you can go about doing this. Okay, so as you guys can see, I got this successfully in after a little bit of angling bolts to get them all going correctly. But pretty much I put these bushings and their housings on first, then attach the mustache bar itself to the diff, raise the diff up so that these bolt holes lined up, put these bolts through, and now it should be good to go. One notable thing, just FYI, is that these bolts and nuts are standard size, not metric size, so you're going to have, I believe it's 5/8 inch ratchet and 3/8 inch Allen key to tighten them correctly. But yeah, diff is successfully in.
Okay, so before we install the Wolfcreek CV kit, we're gonna have to grease them up pretty good. Now, Futofab says to do 1 packet of grease per CV, and they also say that you should remove the boot flange and grease from the rear and the front, but I'm having a little bit of trouble getting the boot flange off, and I don't want to tear that rubber to allow any grease to get in. So I'm just going to try to grease them really well, just from the front side to get into those ball bearings. And as they say, you want to be careful not to turn these over 30 degrees, or else you risk all of these 6 ball bearings coming out and falling on the ground, which would be quite a hassle to get back in. So I'm going to carefully turn. And now, if you... it's kind of like greasing a wheel bearing. If you've seen my video about greasing a wheel bearing, then it's pretty similar to that. You just want to really get that grease in there and see it poking out from the other side so that it's completely around the ball bearing. So I'm just going to start out by putting some grease just around the center of this and just massaging it in. And then what I like to do is cut. That would be the dry. Cut the corner. I like to just cut the corner of this so it's almost like a cake frosting bag, and it allows you to kind of inject it into.
I think that will resonate with your viewers.
Into the side.
Cake frosting bag analogy.
Shut the fuck up.
You can just dub it later.
God damn it.
I just think to myself, the most normal one here is Joe.
In case you haven't noticed, we lost our original camera woman to an injury
That's her.
that has caused her to take a lot of drugs. The opioid epidemic is real, folks.
Unrelated to camera work. though,
Unrelated to
I should
camera
say.
work, the opioid epidemic.
Extracurricular
Yeah.
situation.
So, like cake frosting.
As you well know.
Squeeze it all up. And then, you kind of put it in here, and I don't know if you can see this, but it's going to start poking out the other side. I don't know if you can get a shot of that.
The light's pretty bad.
Throw me a wash, rinse, repeat.
Shut up.
The dog is upset.
So I like to cut it like a cake bag,
Again, very powerful.
and then kind of put it into this area where the ball bearing is, and just squeeze it in, and you can see it kind of coming out the other side. And I'm just gonna really try to massage it in there, and then once it's pretty in there, I'll move this around, get a little bit of rotation, so that it goes around the ball bearings, and you kind of get a 360-degree greasing of the bearings. Because I'm not going to be able to go from the back side, I want to make sure it gets everywhere.
And it's kind of a tedious process, but they say do it for like 1 bag per CV joint. So just try to do that until the whole bag is gone. You don't have a large excess around the top.
Okay, so as you can see, the axle is almost ready to be installed. Here we have the mustache bar. It's kind of hard to get a clean shot, but okay, there we go. There's the diff, and the axle all lined up with the adapter plates. It comes back here to meet up with your hub. So we got brake, hub, adapter part A, adapter part B, and what I've done is I've just put it up on my little shop chair, which actually lines up pretty well with the overall height, because again, you really don't want to stress these over 30 degrees or else you do risk all of the ball bearings coming out. But pretty much what I'm going to do is just these are 6mm hex bolts right here. I'm just going to hand tighten them with an Allen wrench, going in a star pattern just to even out torque, and then I'm going to torque them down to 35 foot-pounds. It's kind of tricky getting these things to line up with the diff, but you just do a little bit of finessing and it'll go right into place. Do a couple at a time, and then you can let it free fall off of whatever you're using to hold it up, and it should be good. So before you actually attach your axles to your diff and your wheel hub, this is what you want them to look like in terms of matching up the inner ball bearings with the outer adapter plates. You want to have small gap matching up with big gap, and big gap matching up with small gap, as you can see in this picture. Okay, so now the axle's in. All these guys have been torqued to 35 foot-pounds. And what's nice about this axle kit is that obviously there's a lot of grease going on in these parts, but what Futofab and Wolfcreek Racing have done is they leave little holes in these bolts, and what you do is you just tie these bolts together. I'm probably going to do it with like a thin wire, just to prevent them from loosening, and these washers join them together, plus that piece of wire is going to make it so they won't spin, and they're going to stay torqued down to 35 foot-pounds, because obviously you can't use thread lock on these, so it's just a good extra precaution that they allow you to take. But that's it for the differential, mustache bar, conversion axles, and axle kit. So thanks for watching, guys.